but to get you oriented to where we are on the battlefield, I want to show you. This is the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Parks map. This is for the Fredericksburg unit. Number 1 on this map, right here towards the center, is the Fredericksburg Visitor Center. And then tour stop number 3 on the driving tour map is Lee's Hill. And you can see that the green along this drive, known as Lee Drive, is very, very narrow until you get to the south end of the Fredericksburg battlefield, where it opens up to a place called Bernard's Cabins, the Union Breakthrough, and Prospect Hill. That is specifically the line of Stonewall Jackson down in that area. When Fredericksburg was founded, the National Park Service's Enabling Act in 1927 only allowed for about 20 feet of land off of each side of this road, known as Lee Drive, to be purchased by the National Park Service. They're using what we call the Antietam Plan. This is always going to be land that is going to be farmland. So why are we going to spend the taxpayers' money on a bunch of land that nobody needs to purchase, and it'll always be farmland? So this is what the idea behind the 4 battlefields in the Fredericksburg area were developed around. Narrow avenues with only small swaths of land and entrenchments purchased by the federal government. Well, fast forward into the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and with the advent of I-95, this area just explodes and is now a bedroom community of Washington, D.C. And because of that, we need we need to help the National Park Service. And in downtown Fredericksburg, what we know today as the American Battlefield Trust was founded by members of Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park, independent scholars, and others coming together to help save this land. So when you look down Lee Drive today on this map, what you're seeing is a small swath of land, and that is why you see the south end of the battlefield, where we've done a lot of work at the place called the Slaughter Pen Farm. We've done some other work down there near a place called Hamilton's Crossing. This is why it's integral that we have to put this park back together, because of the short-sightedness of the commission who put together this original Enabling Act back in the 1920s. Now, we could have never have imagined at this time that the development would have exploded the way it would through this I-95 corridor, but still, it's unfortunate that we're paying the price today. But we hope that you will help us to do that, because we're looking at a very, very important piece of property, even though it is a small piece of the Fredericksburg battlefield. In fact, Lee's Hill, which is named after the guy on the left-hand side of your screen, Robert E. Lee, that is going to be his advanced command post during the First Battle of Fredericksburg. These are just some of the men who stepped foot on the property that we're trying to save today. This happened during the First Battle of Fredericksburg, and in the wake of it. This was Robert E. Lee's command post, this land that we're going to be helping to preserve. We'll see James Longstreet, his second in command, spend time up there. Stonewall Jackson, who's sitting below James Longstreet there in the center, that uniform that he's wearing, and this photograph that was taken about a week before his wounding at Chancellorsville, this is the first time he will ever wear that uniform, that Confederate gray uniform that we know him in from this photograph. He will wear it on the land that we're trying to save. And in fact, James Longstreet will tease him about just how flashy he looks. Because prior to that, Stonewall Jackson always wore his old blue uniform from his time in the United States Army. And it got so soaked on the way to Fredericksburg, he had to put on a new uniform, and that's the uniform that you see there. We also had Jeb Stuart up here, Robert Ransom, William Barksdale during the Second Battle of Fredericksburg, and William Pendleton, the Chief of Artillery of Lee's Army. So it is a cavalcade of officers who come up on top of this hill. It is potentially from this spot that Lee looked to the south towards the Slaughter Pen Farm and said, it is good that war is so terrible, lest we grow too fond of it. So this piece of property itself is very important from the Confederate High Command perspective. It's also very important from the perspective of the Second Battle of Fredericksburg, and we'll get into all of this. And in fact, Robert E. Lee is potentially almost killed on the piece of property that we're trying to save at Fredericksburg. But most of you are aware of Fredericksburg, but just to make sure we're all on the same page very quickly, Fredericksburg sits, as I mentioned, between Washington and Richmond. It sits on the banks of the Rappahannock River, and this is a wartime view of what Fredericksburg looks like. Many of the spires that you're seeing in the city, such as the Presbyterian Church, St. George's Episcopal Church, the City Hall, all of those spires are still there today. There are a number of bridges spanning the Rappahannock River. The one that you see in the middle ground here was the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad Bridge that was destroyed in April of 1862 by Confederates. and it sits on the banks of the Rappahannock River, which at this point is about 440 feet wide. So this is a perfect view of what Fredericksburg would look like. In November of 1862, Ambrose Burnside moves the Union Army of the Potomac, Lincoln's principal army, down to this side of the river where this photograph is taken from. This is the Stafford County, Virginia side, looking out towards Spotsylvania County and the city of Fredericksburg. When Burnside arrives here, his army does not have pontoon bridges to get across this river. They're promised to him. They didn't arrive. So unfortunately for Burnside, he's stuck on the wrong side of the river. Confederates arrive in force. They'll take up positions along a series of hills on the western side of the city, as well as down in the city itself. And over the next few days, Burnside's going to come up with a plan. It'll eventually cross into the city of Fredericksburg itself and then cross south of the city and make a two-pronged assault on the Confederate lines. This is a map that I have from one of my books, and Lee's Hill sits roughly to the left center of the line here. That'll give you an idea. It's off to the left center, and this will be during the First Battle of Fredericksburg. The famed Marye's Heights sector is just here to the north, where you see the names Sumner and Hooker. Those will be 7 failed infantry assaults that take place on the afternoon of December 13th, producing nearly 8,000 Federal casualties. On the south side of the map here, on the bottom side of the map, we will have the only Federal breakthrough of the battlefield at a place called Prospect Hill, coming right across that property that we helped to preserve at the Slaughter Pen Farm. This will be the brief breakthrough that took place, and that'll be pushed back. The attack will be pushed back. But during the Battle of First Fredericksburg, Robert E. Lee will be on our piece of property here, as well as up on this property that's in front of it. That's the National Park Service property. And Lee will be watching the battle unfold. He'll mostly be looking towards the south, towards a place called Deep Run, which is towards the bottom of our map, as well as the Slaughter Pen Farm. Because of the nature of where Lee's Hill sits, he really can't see too much of what's going on Marye's Heights sector. And I'll show you a picture that will illustrate this here in a few slides. But Lee's Hill actually sits 0.8 of a mile behind Marye's Heights, which is a series of 5 hills along the western side of the city of Fredericksburg. And it sits to the south and behind these hills, so he can't kind of see around what's going on. So he knows that our assaults are taking place up here. This is James Longstreet's sector. And then to the south, we have Stonewall Jackson's sector. So Lee's kind of in the middle. He's making sure that he can support troops at any point. Well, during the battle, most of the time, James Longstreet will be hanging out with Lee up here at Lee's headquarters, as we call it, on Lee's Hill, as will Lafayette McLaws, a division commander in Longstreet's corps. And as Robert E. Lee and Longstreet are standing near an artillery position atop the hill, a 30-pounder Parrott gun that was produced in Richmond's Tredegar Iron Works on its 39th shot exploded. This Confederate cannon nearly kills Lee, Longstreet, and McLaws while they're standing up on top of Lee's Hill. Lee has a second close call up on or near our property that we're trying to preserve, and that is an artillery shell embedded in the earth, fired from the Federals. Hits right beside Robert E. Lee, and luckily for him, it was a dud. It did not explode. So Lee, on Lee's Hill, is nearly killed twice. Now, jumping forward to April of 1863, this is one of the most famous photographs taken during the American Civil War, and it wasn't taken during the First Battle of Fredericksburg. It was actually taken during the Second Battle of Fredericksburg on May 3rd, 1863. And this is not a staged photograph. It was taken just a matter of hours after the Union Army swept over top of the famed Sunken Road that you're looking at, and Marye's Heights, which is off to the right-hand side of the picture. Gary and I actually did a step-in video if you want to go over to our YouTube channel and learn more about this photograph, but this will transition into the Second Battle of Fredericksburg that took place in the spring of 1863. In the spring of 1863, again, Fredericksburg sits basically in the middle of our map. Our own John Mitchell on our staff created some of these maps for us. What Joseph Hooker, the new Union Army commander, wants to do after the Federal defeat at Fredericksburg, Hooker takes over. What he wants to do is lead a 3-pronged assault on Robert E. Lee's forces, which have been stationed at Fredericksburg for the last almost 6 months. Lee will establish a long defensive line at Fredericksburg and basically have to wait to play to Joseph Hooker's tune in the spring of 1863. Hooker moves approximately 135,000 men in motion in April of 63. He will move a wing around the left flank of the Confederates towards a place called Chancellorsville. He will send his horsemen, 10,000 or so strong, on a long circuitous ride around Robert E. Lee's army down towards Richmond. Not a great idea, and it wasn't well executed. But at the same time, to keep Robert E. Lee's focus at Fredericksburg, Hooker will dispatch initially half of his army, what he calls the left wing under Uncle John Sedgwick, to keep Robert E. Lee's attention. And they will cross the river at Fredericksburg at a place called the Bend, and near today's Fredericksburg Country Club, on the morning of April 29th of 1863. They will force a riverine crossing, and the Union 6th Corps and 1st Corps will establish a lodgment very close to our slaughter pen farm. In fact, the slaughter pen farm sits where this compass rose is on this map, and the Federals will push out towards that area, sits near that area. And so the Federals, once they establish a bridgehead, will take another famous photograph of the Civil War during the Second Fredericksburg Campaign that's often mistaken for being at Petersburg. These are trenches. This is a picture of trenches taken almost adjacent to our slaughter pen farm at Fredericksburg. These are the Union 6th Army Corps guys who are sitting there waiting for orders during the Chancellorsville campaign. So once Joe Hooker has his army in motion, he sends one wing around Robert E. Lee's left. He sends one into his front to keep his attention. And those troops here on Lee's front just kind of hang out there for a little while. And Robert E. Lee, being Robert E. Lee, will not sit behind entrenchments. He is, in fact, going to split his army into two pieces. He's going to send one portion of his army out towards Chancellorsville. It'll be directly commanded initially by Stonewall Jackson. And then he's going to leave about 11,000 troops under the command of his bad old man, a guy named Jubal Anderson Early, and 56 cannons at Fredericksburg. You'll see on this map, this is one of my maps from one of my books, Telegraph Hill, that's Lee's Hill. That'll be known that after the war. And that will be used as a headquarters for a second time during that battle, and that will be William Barksdale's headquarters. Things play out at Chancellorsville, where Joe Hooker puts his army behind entrenchments. Stonewall Jackson leads a flank attack, and Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson turn the tables on Joe Hooker. Because what Hooker was trying to do was send troops across at Fredericksburg, bring men in from Chancellorsville, and smash Lee between him. Now what Lee has done is split his army into three pieces, and he is trying to do the reverse to Joe Hooker, trying to play that against Joe Hooker. On the late morning of May 3rd, Union forces will attack across this plain. That's the old Fredericksburg Plain at Murray's Heights. They will sweep up over top of Murray's Heights, where this picture was taken from, and they will capture the Sunken Road and the Gibraltar of the South, as it is known, one of the many Gibraltars of the South here at Fredericksburg. And this is what the assault will look like. The Federals, up on the top part of our map, will make a mass assault towards Murray's Heights, but at the same time, on the south end of the Second Fredericksburg battlefield, across an open plain, part of Albion Howe's division of the Union 6th Army Corps will attack Lee's Hill. And this is going to be over here in our left-hand side of our center map. That's our property that we're trying to save. That will be William Barksdale's headquarters. We will have troops from the 13th and the 17th Mississippi stationed in this area, as well as a large number of Confederate cannon, which will be sprinkled along the line. But unlike the first Battle of Fredericksburg, where Robert E. Lee had a 7-mile line manned by 78,000 men, Jubal Early has a 5-mile line only manned by 11,000. So it's pretty thin on the ground. And the Federals, when they attack here, some of them will go towards Murray's Heights, and others will come here towards Lee's Hill. And Lee's Hill will become a rallying point for many of the 6th Corps troops, because as the Confederates, who are defeated on the north side of the battlefield at Murray's Heights, they will start falling back towards the south, towards Telegraph Road, and towards Lee's Hill. And as that happens, the Federals are going to come in pursuit, and more Federals will come up and out of this valley to attack across Lee's Hill. Leading the attack will be the 77th New York Infantry, known as the Bemis Heights Regiment. They'll be out in a heavy skirmish line, and they're actually going to zigzag their way across the field. Some will go right, some will go left, go right, go left, obliquing left and right to try to throw off the Confederates of where they're actually going to strike. And as they come across this field, they will start to push back Mississippians, and then they will start to ascend the hillside here at Lee's Hill. Vermonters, men from New Jersey, and others will start to join in with this assault, including men from Maine. and men from New York, and they will start to push the Confederates to the top of the hill, which is by now smoking. It is a choking, acrid smoke that is coming across the battlefield. Coming up into the smoke will also be some guns of the famed Washington Artillery of New Orleans, Louisiana. Some of them were positioned on Marie sites. Some were positioned at Prospect Hill. They'll roll into battery, one of the guns just in time to be captured by men from Vermont and New York. But coming up this hill will be a sergeant with Company G of the 2nd Vermont Infantry. His name is Ephraim Harrington. Harrington's a farmer who was born in Maine but moved to Vermont, and he will carry the colors of the 2nd Vermont Infantry up the hill right to the mouths of the Confederate guns, and for his actions, he will be a recipient of the Medal of Honor. William Barksdale, who used this as his headquarters, had a fantastic quote the morning of the Battle of 2nd Fredericksburg, and he is going to complain that he was surrounded by 1,000,000 armed Yankees. Another Confederate will claim, because there was only a small group of them left here at Fredericksburg as a rear guard during the Chancellorsville campaign, that maybe that this will convince the Southern Confederacy that William Barksdale's brigade and Jubal Early's division were not enough to defeat the entire Federal Army. But it played out here on Lee's Hill, where during the first Battle of Fredericksburg, no one attacks, but Robert E. Lee's nearly killed here twice. But during the second Battle of Fredericksburg, we have a Medal of Honor recipient earning his medal here at Lee's Hill, and this is used as a combat zone as well as a headquarters for William Barksdale. So this is a very, very key piece of property that we've been eyeing for many, many decades. Just to show you one picture here, this is the picture of the 18th Mississippi flag that was captured just near Lee's Hill, not on the property we're trying to save, but this is the only battle flag captured during the Second Battle of Fredericksburg, and that was captured down along the famous sunken road as the 18th Mississippi retreats off of the battlefield. This was eventually returned to the State Archives of Mississippi. And the Medal of Honor recipient, Ephraim Harrington, this is a picture of him. He was a sergeant at the time of the Second Battle of Fredericksburg on May 3rd, 1863. He eventually rises to the rank of captain. To give you an idea, to close up what Lee's Hill looks like today, this is pictures I just took this week to give you an idea of what Lee's Hill looks like. Part of the property is owned by the National Park Service, and then the backside of the hill where we're trying to save is the property we're trying to preserve. There is a walk that you can take up Lee's Hill. It's not a steep hill, but it is a switchback, and it'll take you about 20 minutes to do a round trip walk up through here. This is one of the old War Department tablets that was placed here to take you up to the top of the hill. This is what the hill looks like today. You can see a lot of leaves that are dry on the ground. This would have played into the Battle of 2nd Fredericksburg whenever they did catch on fire. So you can see there are dry leaves here even to this day. The Federals will actually come up through the center of this picture. There's actually a dip. I'm on one side of a hill. The other side is another ridge line, and towards the center, which didn't show up very well in this photograph, is actually a ravine where some of the men from Vermont as well as New Jersey will come up to seize this heights on May 3rd of 1863. This is the Lee's Hill Confederate Command Post War Department sign. And then this is an open-air exhibit shelter. This is not what Robert E. Lee's headquarters looked like during the battle. This is a 1950s, 60s exhibit shelter that was placed here during the Mission 66 era. But there are a number of panels that you can learn more about the battle, and there is actually a vista that's cut out towards the battlefield. I'll show you in a second. One of the 10 Smith markers are on this hill. This says Lee's Hill, Battle of Fredericksburg, December 12th, 13th, 1862. 10 of these markers were placed across the Fredericksburg, Wilderness, Chancellorsville, and Spotsylvania battlefields in 1902 and 1903 by James Power Smith, who is a former staff officer of Stonewall Jackson and becomes the Presbyterian minister of the Downtown Presbyterian Church. This is one of the interpretive panels the National Park Service has along Lee Hill, and this is a 30-pounder Parrott gun, not the gun that exploded up here, but it was in this vicinity that Robert E. Lee was nearly killed twice. And then this is the cut in the trees that is still here in 1862 and 63. This would have been a much more open vista. Today, you can't see very much, but I did zoom in, so this will give you an idea. My next photograph. of where Maurice Heights sits. If you look towards the center of this photograph, you might be able to make out an American flag, and you might be able to see the steeple of St. George's Church downtown. That American flag is actually the National Cemetery atop Maurice Heights. So that'll give you an idea of just how far forward Maurice Heights sits in comparison to Lee Hill. That's 8/10 or so of a mile as the crow flies from where this picture was taken from. So Robert E. Lee would have a problem seeing what happened in the Maurice Heights sector. That's why we think that he looked to the south end of the battlefield towards the slaughter pen farm. This is an area that's very much in danger. Lee's Hill sits roughly here below the Y and Lafayette Boulevard, or Lafayette Boulevard, how it's pronounced here in Fredericksburg. This would look towards the south end of the battlefield down here. The Fredericksburg Field House is just north of our slaughter pen farm. This is the airport that's down here, and this is our slaughter pen farm where you see Rap Rocks climbing gym. That's not on our property. And then to the north, you'll see this little icon, and that is the Fredericksburg Battlefield Visitor Center. And so this is why it's going to be important for us to help preserve this land, because Lee's Hill is here where this tree sits. When this Google Earth image was taken, where you see Caliber Collision, this whole housing plan was under construction. It is now complete. It's a massive housing plan. That power transmission line that I told you about runs right here below the L in Lee's Hill. And then out to the front where the Federal 6th Army Corps assaulted is almost entirely warehouses, factories, and anything else you could think of, with the exception of Brayhead Farm. That's about the only open property that is down here. And then whenever you look to the north, you can see the small oasis of green that is Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park that lends itself into the University of Mary Washington, where you can see their athletic complexes on the backside of Maurice Heights. And of course, the Maurice Heights sector has largely been built over. So this aerial will give you an idea of why Lee's Hill is so important when it comes to the fact that there's so much expansion in this area with the locals. And then, of course, I hope that the first slide that I showed you with how many Confederate officers were here just during the first battle, and then, of course, our Medal of Honor recipient during the second battle, will show you just how important this was throughout the entire Civil War.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.